This is Nightingale Hospital, a teaching hospital in the UK. In the past, the hospital's reputation was not very good, but since the establishment of the research department 5 years ago and the appointment of charismatic Dr. Kenneth Bradford as its first head of research, the Nightingale Hospital has started to win national recognition as a center for medical research. The communication department has had to work hard to raise the hospital reputation in order to attract quality staff, and this success has given your work and that human resources department big boost. But suddenly, the head of the communication department received a message of mid-level administrator who found evidence that over the last 5 years, a large number of organs have been retained for research purposes without full consent of the deceased patients' families. This violation of the principle of informed consent, as well as the moral outrage, which could result made worse because of a well-known and similar incident at Alder Hey. Alder Hey, a hospital in Liverpool, was the center of a well-published scandal involving the removal of organs of dead children at post-mortem examination without parental consent at Alder Hey. If the press gets wind of scandal of Nightingale Hospital, they are almost certain to present it as another Alder Hey. All the progress made at Nightingale in the last 5 years could be lost overnight to the detriment of the hospital and the community which it serves. The question that occurs for head of the communication department is what to do now. Before elaborating the solution, we must consider that crisis management theories must be covered and taken into consideration because these theories are very closely related. But if we speak about ethical part of the problem, Sims devised a decision-making model that should help working practitioners who were faced with ethical dilemmas. This model consists out of 7 steps. First of all, the head of communication department should recognize and clarify the dilemma. After that, should get all the facts and list all the options. The hospital had a bad reputation 5 years ago. The communication department has had to work hard to boot up the reputation. If the head of the communication department would tell the truth about the organs being used without permission, the hospital will probably be back to where it started 5 years ago. So does the head of the communication department tell the truth, knowing all the work will be destroyed, or does he lie to save the reputation? The decision is probably based on different ethical theories and approaches. In ethical theory, the first and most profound division is between the assumption that it is possible to know moral right from wrong and the denial of that assumption. Cognitivists believe that there are actual and objective moral truth and absolutes that enables us to make firm statements about whether an action or belief is good or bad, right or wrong. Non-cognitivists believe that morality is subjective or is bound up with a specific cultural context of individuals. They believe there are no moral absolutes, only beliefs, attitudes, and options. Ethical theories which argue that it's possible to know right from wrong can be divided into 2 groups, the consequentialist and the non-consequentialist perspective. The consequentialist perspective focuses on results or consequences of behavior. This is known as a teleological approach. An example for consequentialist theory is utilitarianism, which states that actions are not good or bad in themselves. They must be judged by the effects that they have. An action is good when it provides the greatest happiness for the greatest possible number of people. The head of the communication department of the Nightingale Hospital would use the theory of utilitarianism. He would not tell the public about the problem to save the reputation of the hospital and the jobs of the research department because of the fact that this would cause the greatest happiness for the greatest possible number of people. The disadvantage of using this approach would be that it permits the sacrificing of individuals and minorities for the greater good. Also, it could be that if the public finds out about the issue at the Nightingale later, it may cause more damage to the reputation of the hospital because the hospital kept the information from the public in the first place. Utilitarianism can be contrasted with the non-consequentialist ethical position, which argues that it's the motivation rather than the consequences which is the important factor in deciding whether an action is ethical or not. This perspective is generally referred to as an deontological approach and is associated with Immanuel Kant. Kant argues that ethics is grounded in notions of duty, and it follows from this that some actions are morally obligatory regardless of their consequences. According to Kant, an act is carried out of sense of duty when it's performed in accordance with what he calls the categorical imperative, which states that the principle we act upon should be one we can recommend everyone else to act upon. If the head of communication department would use this ethical approach in dealing with the situation at the hospital, the right decision would be to tell the truth to the public because the categorical imperative states that we should do unto other as we would have them to do unto us. The advantage of this approach is that the hospital shows responsibility and honesty towards the public. The disadvantages are the publication of the scandal would be affecting the hospital's reputation negatively, and probably a lot of people might lose their job at the hospital. Moreover, the situation would be hard to handle for the families of the patients that find out about their family members' organs being used for research without their permission. It is important to note that there are not only theories which argue that it is possible to know right from wrong, there are also ethic approaches that reject the idea that there are objective standards of right and wrong. One of these approaches is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics looks more at the motivations of an individual rather than their actions or the consequences of their actions. This does not mean that principles or consequences are unimportant, but they are considered with regard to individual's character. A decision is good if an individual can answer the following question with yes. Would I feel comfortable if my behavior appeared on the front page of the local newspaper, or if my family knew I'd done this? Another non-cognitivistic approach is situational ethics. Situational ethics asserts that no moral law or principle is absolute. The situation itself alerts the rules. Therefore, part of our moral responsibility is to put aside the rules for the greater good and do whatever the situation demands. Free determinants must be considered to decide whether an action is ethical or not. The act itself of what one does, the motives why one does it, and the circumstances or how, where, when one does it. After collecting all the possible options, Sim suggests to test each option by asking, is it legal? Is it right? And is it beneficial? The fourth step is to make the decision. Since the head of the communication department has worked hard to fix the reputation of the hospital, we think that he surely does not want to destroy all that in one go. But we hold the view that using organs without permission is such a big deal that we cannot keep it as a secret or reject that it happened. As a result, we would inform the public about the fact that there have been organs used without permission, but we also would tell them that we didn't know that there was no permission, and that, for instance, something in the administration went wrong, and that we apologize for this. 5. After decision-making progress, Sims proposed to double-check the decision by asking, how would I feel if my family would found about this? How would I feel if my decision was printed in the local newspaper? And the final step, it should be to take the action.